Welcome to another episode of Tough Topics. I'm your host, Vonny Sweetland. With the 2022 federal conservative leadership race heating up, candidates have made their way to the forefront, each with a unique vision for both the Conservative Party of Canada and this country. The vote is set to take place on September 10th, but before that, candidates will have the time to make their case to Conservatives as to why they should be elected leader of the party. This morning, I'm excited to be joined by former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, former Premier of Quebec, and current Conservative leadership candidate, Jean Charest. Jean, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you, Vonny. I'm just coming off a COVID episode and feeling quite well, but thank you for asking.
Yes, and you're on the mend, I'm assuming?
Yes, I'm feeling very well now and tested negative, so I'll be up and on the road again. It's been a busy period, but like everyone else, I'm fully vaccinated, and it was like a small flu.
Well, that's good to hear. Without wasting time, I'm going to jump into some of these tough topics. Can you share with our viewers who may not be familiar with your record some of the things you've achieved in government and why you've entered the ring to fight for this nation's top spot this time around?
Well, everything I've done in my political life has been about the country. It's been about Canada, Vonny. When I was in federal politics, I fought in the referendum of '95 and went to Quebec politics because of the separatist threat, and was successful in fighting that off and fighting off the threat of a third referendum. When I was in government, Vonny, I espouse very much conservative values, fiscal conservatism, for example. We left a huge surplus to the government of Mr. Legault when he came in after 15 years of my government that was followed by Mr. Couillard, my successor, higher credit rating in Quebec than Ontario. We had policies in support of family, respect to the rule of law, and a practice of federalism that is very respectful of the jurisdiction of the provinces, that makes this federal system work so that we can get big things done. So that's the record I have that I bring to this leadership race, that I bring to the party. And the idea here is to unite this party so that we are the national alternative that Canadians want us to be, as opposed to a fractured party or a political party that goes down the route of American politics.
Yes, I would agree. That's definitely something that's challenging right now. I talk about this a lot on the show and in articles that I write. I think there's a polarization happening in this country, and we're seeing politics become quite divisive. Is that something you're concerned about?
Well, it explains why I'm in this race. This country is very divided right now, balkanized. Worse than I've seen it since the early 80s. And we should not allow it to happen. There's a rule in life that applies to politics. There is no fatality, Vonny. It's not true that things are just going to be this way. And when you run for office, it's because you believe that those things can be changed. And that's what I'm running for. I believe that this party can unite the country, and I believe we can be a national political party if we choose to be. And that's what this choice will be in the leadership race. Either we're going to go down one route of American-style wedge politics, or we're going to be the party that Canadians want us to be, a national political party.
Sure. I want to talk to you about the crisis of housing affordability. We've got problems really from the bottom of the market all the way to the top. But the most common finding is young Canadians are priced out of the market. And at this rate, we'll never actualize the dream of homeownership in this country. How do you plan to change that if elected leader and ultimately prime minister?
And Vonny, COVID seems to have exacerbated the problem. It's made it worse, not any easier, because of the movement of people wanting to buy houses in outlying areas. And so the first area that we have to deal with is the inventory of houses, the number of houses. The inventory is low; it's too low, which increases the price, increases the demand, and prices young families out of the market. So that has to be one of the first orders of business for governments. And what are the things we have to work on so that we can build more houses? We can build houses that are affordable. It means that we have to work with the provinces, we have to work with municipalities to be able to develop more of that offer so that young families have access to it. That would be the first order of business.
Well, and to your point, John, I'll say this. In 1950, we had close to 2.5 billion people living on Earth, 80% of the population being rural. If you compare that to what numbers look like today, we've got over 7 billion people on Earth with 85% living urban. So to me, that's a huge difference. And it seems that taxation could play a huge role in housing affordability for young people by potentially having the federal government incentivize the process for first-time homeowners to move to rural communities in exchange for things like 0% interest mortgage loans for a select time period and so on. Could taxation be part of the solution, or do you view this as just being about building and supply and demand?
Taxation can definitely be part of the solution. The challenge, Vonny, is to really get it right, because you don't want to be, by taxing or tax schemes, you don't want to be financing the wrong people, which is often one of the unpredictable outcomes. So, but taxation definitely you have to look at, and how can you create an environment in which first-time buyers can actually buy. You have to look at mortgages, conditions on mortgages, all the deductibility around that. So it's probably a bouquet of measures that you have to look at, but it can't be addressed without first dealing with the inventory issue, which is fundamental. I mean, we just need more houses. It's that simple.
Yes, and how do you work with provincial and even municipal counterparts to get that done from the federal level?
Well, it's a very good question, because at the federal level, we have a lot of powers. I mean, the federal government doesn't operate a lot of things, Vonny. It's the provinces that run the country on a day-to-day basis. But what the federal government does have, it does have its spending power, it has its convening power. So, and frankly, my experience of being premier, I think it will be a breath of fresh air in helping this federal system work. So the federal government can sit down with the provinces. It can figure out with them and use financial incentives, other incentives, to be able to help resolve these kind of problems. And we can do it in housing, and we can do it in a whole host of areas if we have our act together and if we respect provincial jurisdictions. So that's the approach that you need to take, but you have to have someone who believes in that and has that respect for provincial jurisdiction to be able to make that happen.
Sure. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room, Huawei. Some of your competitors have highlighted your work with the Chinese tech company as a negative, but I know that your work with the company was instrumental in helping to bring the two Michaels home to Canada. For viewers that may be wondering, can you clarify the nature of your work with Huawei and ultimately where you stand on the company's bid to participate in Canada's 5G internet network?
Well, I've worked a lot in the private sector. I have a lot of private sector experience. And let me start by just saying that whatever I did in the private sector, I never did or represented anyone who I felt was contrary, whose interest was contrary to the interest of my own country. And that's just the story of my life. That's what I've done all my life. And in the case of Huawei, yes, I did help in freeing the two Michaels by working with the family of Michael Kovrig and sorting that situation out, and made a contribution and did whatever I could to make that happen. Now, for the future, I fully subscribe to the position of the party that we should ban Huawei from 5G. We should be aligned with our partners in the world, which includes what we call the Five Eyes: the United States, New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain. And for the future, given the changing circumstances, and that includes this conflict in Europe, we need to revisit, from a security point of view, our telecom and our resource allocations, our natural resources in terms of national security. So that's the position that I'm going to represent and bring in the higher interest of Canada on these issues.
Sure. And on the nature of your work, particularly pertaining to the two Michaels, how did that work impact the outcome? Because I know, of course, it was a positive outcome. They ended up being brought home.
It had a positive impact because by sorting out the situation, Vonny, that was on the extradition charge, we were able to secure the return of the two Michaels. And what I'm telling you is that it became very apparent to everyone that the path to the return of the two Michaels was, if we were able to get that done, if the United States were able to come to some agreement with Huawei, then after that, the Michaels would come back home. And that's what we worked to achieve. And we did achieve it, and the Michaels did return. And that is something that all of us felt very strongly about, because this Michaels, that the situation of the Michaels is a kidnapping. I mean, it's a government sanctioned kidnapping by the Chinese government. I'm sorry, but there's no other way to describe it. And so to resolve that matter and to see them freed was for everyone a big relief.
And is that hurtful to you, seeing some of your competitors mischaracterize your work in that way?
They're doing it. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're saying, well, Charest was a liberal, as though there was a conservative party in Quebec. There never was a conservative. There is now one recently constituted. But, like British Columbia, when they say liberal, I led a coalition of federalists in Quebec, and I went to Quebec to defend Canada. So to mischaracterize it that way is actually thinking, that people are dumb, that they don't understand what happened. So, but, in the end, frankly, Vonny, I mean, if people want to attack me and spend more time attacking me than running their own campaign, it says more about them than it does about me.
I would agree. Last week, I had one of your competitors on this show, and I asked them this question, and I'd like to ask it to you as well, because I think it's an important one. The Conservative Party uses the term big tent in the description of broad inclusion. Many would argue that Prime Minister Harper was the last Conservative leader able to hold the party together. What do you think is needed to build and keep the party together, especially now in such a polarizing political environment?
There has to be an understanding of what a political party is to start with, Vonny, and this may sound pretty fundamental, but it's lost on some people. A political party is a living institution. It evolves through its leaders in time. And every leader leaves their mark. And when you become the leader of the party, you take it as it is. So it isn't about saying, well, there was this era and one is opposed to the other. They're not. They're all part of the same history. And the new leader needs to understand that, take the party as it is, and be respectful of the fact that we are like-minded. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the same party together. But there may be different views on different issues, and we need to be respectful of that. And then agree on a common agenda and make up our mind. Do we want to be a national party? Yes or no? And if we want to be a national political party, then let's do what Canadians expect from us. Present them a vision on the economy, on how we're going to get things done, how we're going to unite the country, make the federal system work. And if we're able to do that, and I obviously believe I'm the leader who can make that happen, well, then they will give us their confidence, and we will be able to form a government that will really represent the aspirations of Canadians.
Yes, I think Canadians need to have options, and I think the Conservative Party would be well suited to unite and be able to truly represent all of the perspectives that are in our diverse country. So I agree with you there. Canadians have a growing need for energy and recognize the need for responsible climate goals. How should Canada continue to lead in resource development? And what does a responsible transition to cleaner energy sources look like? Does it include a carbon tax? Because I know there's been a lot of debate around this subject.
Well, we're blessed with a lot of resources in the country. In fact, we're lucky. And we're a knowledge-based economy, Vonny, but the resources make up a huge part of our economy, 15 to 20% of our GDP, but a big part of our exports. And the challenge here is to get the transition right and to make sure that we need a very solid climate policy and energy policy. One thing I've learned is that you cannot have a climate policy and energy policy without including the energy sector in the design of it, which the Liberal government has not done, or including the provinces and putting them at the table, which the Liberal government has not done. And because you just can't deliver on it if you don't do it that way. And so in this case, what Canada should be focusing on is how do we get the transition right? We're going to have oil and gas in this world for a while. The conflict in Europe, I mean, the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine is a cruel reminder that the too much dependency on one single country is very, very bad for the world. And in this case, Canada could be an alternative. Had we had our act together on oil or gas, we could be part of the answer and the solution in this conflict, but we're not. These are the things we have to get right, that we have to understand. And if we do, we'll be able to play a role, we'll be able to be part of the solution, and then decarbonize our economy and do it in a gradual and an intelligent way, which by the way is what the industry wants. I met with folks from the oil and gas industry in Calgary. Everyone gets that. They just want to make sure that they're part of the solution and that they are able to contribute in a smart way. So that's what we do. On carbon, we need to put a price on carbon, make sure it doesn't discriminate against people in the outlying rural areas. It's not a wealth transfer tax, and that it's flexible so that we can adjust it. For example, there's going to be an increased plan on the carbon tax on the 1st of April. Well, in this environment, it doesn't make sense to do that because of the very rapid increase in the price of gas. And so we just need to make sure that it's done in a smart way, and that we have carbon capture and storage, that we have biofuels, hydrogen, green, small modular reactors. The nuclear file still is part of the solution. So right. long answer, but there's a lot of good material there.
Well, look, I understand that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. This is a complex subject, and I think we're going to have to look at a multitude of different strategies to get this done. Canada is a diverse country. Onto another topic. From many perspectives, we have got so many different people under this one great roof. And I'll be very frank with you, there are individuals running for the Conservative leadership right now who have terrible records with respect to LGBTQ2+ rights. How will you foster an environment where Canadians from all backgrounds can thrive and build a diverse society of opportunities and prosperity?
Well, it's a basic matter of respect, of human fairness towards every one of our citizens, and Canada takes pride in the fact that we are a diverse country, but that's never something that we can take for granted, Vonny. If you live in a society of diversity, there has to be a constant effort to make sure that we are doing everything we can so that everyone is part of this great country of ours, which means policies that avoid or that address discrimination in any shape or form. And that's what I've stood for all my life. I think it's just a basic feature of our humanity that we would want to be that way, and that every individual feels that are included and loved and appreciated. So on that matter, that's what I would bring to it. And as much as I love the country, it's made up of extraordinary people of all different backgrounds. We have a great story to tell. Not a perfect one, by the way. I mean, far from it. I mean, Canada has had its episodes of very, real discrimination against groups and peoples, and no country has a perfect, trajectory. But here's something that the Prime Minister of the country and the leader of the Conservative Party has to feel strongly about and has to express if we're going to do the right thing.
Right. And how do you get more Canadians to see themselves as potential conservatives? How do underrepresented groups feel like they have a home in a modern Conservative Party? Because many would argue that that has been a challenge for your party.
Vonny, that starts with the leader. It's the leader's job to set the tone and to speak to these issues and to be the most generous person in the room. And anything I've seen about leadership, and that's what I aspire to. And we're all humans. We don't always meet that aspiration because we have our own strengths and weaknesses. But I think we would want the leader of our party and our Prime Minister to be the most generous person in the room, able to say to Canadians and lead Canadians in that direction where we're building a country that is based on that human fairness. We have that reputation in the world right now, but we can't take it for granted. And saying it doesn't mean it's something that we've acquired forever. It's something we have to constantly work at if we're going to live in the kind of society we want to live in. And isn't that the question, Vonny? What kind of a world do I want to live in? I want to live in a world where it isn't about wedge politics, that it's not about emphasizing our differences. I want to live in a world where everyone feels that they have their place and they're included. And as a leader, that's the way I feel about the country, and that's the way I would lead the country.
Well, let me ask you this on that note, and I know this one is big despite it sounding simple, but what
Yeah.
is required of a leader in today's world, and why is John Charest that leader?
Well, I think what is required is that the leader be able to anticipate what changes are coming at us and understand them and have a very deep understanding of why things are happening the way they are and what are the values that as a leader that you espouse. And these values need to be known. And the conservative values I live by is fiscal conservatism, a market-based economy I mentioned, support of families, respecting the rule of law, and a practice of federalism that respects the jurisdiction of the provinces and respects individuals, really the basic respect of every individual. And so those are the things that would govern my choices. And then the broad effort of including every part of the country into a national government so that we can work together and get big things done. So that's what I would bring to it. And that's what my record speaks to.
On health, we have seen throughout COVID-19 and this recent global pandemic that there are a lot of inequities in healthcare. How do we address them from a federal level to make sure that it's a level playing field for everybody and that needs are being met?
Vonny, coming out of COVID, there's going to have to be a huge and a major effort and revisiting all the decisions about our healthcare system. What we've learned is this. In Canada, our healthcare systems were managed in such a way where our hospitals were just at capacity because of budget constraints. And frankly, that was something that hindered our ability to treat people. So now we're going to have to look to the future and ask ourselves, how do we deal with a situation similar to COVID, when there's an exacerbation, when there is an overwhelming demand for healthcare services in emergency situations? And how do we fund that system? How do we make it efficient so that the services are there when we need them? And there's a lot of lessons to be drawn. So the federal government and the provinces are going to have to sit down soon after, not too long, to look at what happened, why it happened, long-term health care for elderly people, for example, what happened there, why did it happen, what other choices we made in the past that we need to revisit and look into the future. There's going to be a lot of work to do. It'll include funding, and it should, but it's more than just funding. Now, when we make those choices, Vonny, important to understand who runs what. It's the provinces who run the healthcare system. The federal government should not try to operate a healthcare system because they don't have the ability to do it. It would be a mistake for them to do it. But what are the things that the feds can do that will support the provinces in allowing all of us to make this healthcare system work more efficiently?
On the Ukraine crisis, we see now that there is a need for Canada to have a strong military. Do you think Canadians would like to see the military supported with more funding? Do you think that that's a path forward?
The Ukrainian crisis is it's heartbreaking for all of us. It really, really is heartbreaking to watch this unfold. And it is a very real reminder of Canadians that we need to assume our own defense and sovereignty. And I'm very concerned about the North, the Arctic in particular. I've traveled a lot to the Arctic in my lifetime, and we're for us, it's an extraordinary part of the country, but yet we don't occupy it enough. We don't occupy it enough to be able to claim all our sovereignty. And Vonny, parts of the Arctic are contested. Even the Americans say that the Northwest Passage is an international passage, not Canadian waters, when in fact it is. And so increasing military spending is going to be absolutely essential. We need to reach 2% of GDP, which is the commitment of NATO. We need to do it in a gradual way, in an intelligent way. But I can already tell you that as a prime minister, I would be very preoccupied, and I'd want to prioritize our presence in northern Canada and the Canadian Arctic, where the Russians just happen to be our neighbors.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question, because as I'm out and about, I talk to people all the time, and average Canadians, I think because of what's going on in Ukraine, are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, we need a strong military in this country. I don't think we can continue to look at defense as, well, our neighbors are going to protect us, right? I think it's got to be about what can we do for ourselves. But because that hasn't been the mantra for so long, how do we go about making that happen?
Well, it's going to require that we increase our spending. It's going to require that we change our procurement to make it more efficient. You know, the buying of jets and ships, it's all been very complicated in Canada and not very efficient. We have to increase the number of people in the military from 60,000 now to probably around 100,000. And then we have to focus on the areas that for which it's a priority for Canada. And that's why I'm returning to the North and the Arctic, where frankly, we are not doing what we need to do to occupy what is our territory and to protect it. And the circumstances of the war in Europe and Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a reminder that no one else is going to do it for us, right? I mean, if there's anything we know, is that if we don't assume our responsibility, we can't count on anyone coming in to do it in our place.
60 seconds, John. Why in September should Conservatives elect you as their leader?
Because Conservative members want a party united, a national political party, a national political Conservative party able to present a national vision to the country and to form the next government. And that's what I will do for this party, and that's what we will do to serve the country.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you best of luck in the upcoming election this September.
Thank you very much, Vonny.
It's a real pleasure. A great interview indeed. And I have to say, one of the key takeaways for me was chatting about the importance of unity. I think that all across this country, we're seeing a polarization. We're seeing divisiveness in our politics, in our homes as we discuss politics. And I think that's sad. What unites us as Canadians is the ability to have healthy discourse, is the ability to respect each other, is the ability to have open dialogue. And I think that's something that should be championed. And as always, I'm your host, Vonny Sweetland, on Tough Topics, where all voices matter.